In Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, developer HAL Laboratory has created the most feature-rich entry in the series. Graphically speaking, it's never looked better, with a 75-strong cast and many stages revamped for Nintendo Switch. The hybrid console gives us a great all-in-one package here too. You get the de facto home console successor to Wii U, but more impressively, a stark upgrade over 3DS's visuals in the handheld realm. Over the last week, I've pored over the game from every angle, figuring out what makes and breaks the game next to these two versions. It's a remarkable achievement, but is it truly the greatest Smash title ever made? Let's find out. First, let's acknowledge the sheer scope of this project. Weighing in at 14 GB, Ultimate contains every character, mode and stage from the series' history, including previous absentees like Ice Climbers and Solid Snake. Notably, the Wii U and 3DS removed Ice Climbers, with HAL's determination to keep roster parity between the two machines. It's understood the 3DS struggled to render 2 characters per player, a technical limit that meant the home console version also missed out. On Switch, well, everything is reinstated. Now, even Switch has a power ceiling, under rare circumstances, that makes Ice Climbers a tricky proposition. More on that later, but the bottom line is that this version at least gives you that option, and many more to play Smash however you like. Booting the game up, there's no questioning the premium finish HAL has lacquered over every detail, even down to its menus. As is series tradition, there's a surfeit of modes that needs to be carefully and clearly arranged to make any of this digestible. The game itself then, what's changed and what stays the same? Compared to the Wii U version, there's a big distinction in the method of lighting. Director Masahiro Sakurai and his team could easily have rested on their laurels and handed in a direct port from Wii U to Switch. And for some that would have been enough, but instead they've gone much further. For a start, its lighting model is drastically overhauled, giving every stage a starker, more vibrant appearance. Both versions run at a native fixed 1920 by 1080 on your TV by the way, but the new lighting gives Switch this brighter, cleaner presentation. That's not the only change. It also helps that the materials, the stonework across the Hyrule Temple for example, are replaced to bring the most out of Switch's revised lighting model. It makes sense given its higher 4GB RAM allocation compared to Wii U's 2GB. For that doubling in capacity, you get high-res textures for all the building sides, though some parts are just left untouched. For instance, grass mapping on the sides is simply the same as what we had 4 years ago, and overhanging moss is neither better or worse, it's just displaced. Likewise for Palutena's temple, which gets an abundance of flowers added in the background, plus new materials on marble pillars, that same muddy grass texture is still there up front. So, a mixed bag it is. The extent of the visual upgrade varies by the stage, but where attention is paid, Ultimate lives up to its moniker. The Bridge of Eldin shows one of the most radical improvements in fact. You get higher grade brick materials underfoot, with blocks now jutting out, and more trees spreading out into the horizon. It's conceivable this is the stage HAL Laboratory meant to create, but perhaps didn't have the resources on Wii U to see it through fully. Either way, it's a vast improvement on Switch and makes the most of a 1080p picture. All of this goes for character detail too, the stars of any Smash title. Clothing is revamped. You can see it in the denim dungarees on Mario, the stitching of which gets a big quality increase on Switch. Again, it's amazing to see this cloth now actually interacts with his fireball attack, alighting the backs of his legs. A more divisive one is Peach's outfit. It ditches the cotton-like material on her Wii U dress for a silk design this time. It brings a glossy specular property to it that shows off the lighting better. More technically demanding? Perhaps. It's arguable which is really better, but certainly work has been put into a redesign here. One more, though this is a bit of a curveball. Donkey Kong can be seen as a downgrade on Switch, in that it completely removes the first shell we had on Wii U. This basically worked as a layering of multiple alpha textures to create a more three-dimensional fuzz effect. Cutting out that fur in Ultimate, we're left with a basic texture without any of the pop of his last appearance. It's possible the characteristics of Wii U's GPU setup lent itself to complex layered effects like this, an element that just doesn't translate cleanly to Switch's Tegra chipset. Also possible, it could be an artistic change of heart on Nintendo's part. We're back to a more classic take on the character then, but it is a shame his design has taken a technical step back. While we're here, let's talk about shadows. Dynamic shadows on characters return from Wii U, meaning every limb on a character casts a crisp point of shade on the ground. It's a big leap over the basic circles used on 3DS too. On Switch it's taken further, and all geometry has full self-shadowing from characters. It means you get more visible shadows across the background of Hyrule, and from Pit across the ladders on Palutena's temple. Now the only sore point here is the actual resolution of the shadows is quite low. You can't help but notice some stages, especially larger scale areas, simply fail to filter the edges, leaving them looking pixelated. Wii U didn't have such a big issue by comparison, and it's definitely a rough point on Switch if you look too close. Expectedly, in typical style for Nintendo's first-party games, there's no anti-aliasing at all. Switch docked under a TV leaves that 1920 by 1080 image completely raw, but that's really not a bad result. In fact, the whole post-process pipeline is kept relatively clean. Bloom is applied sparingly on lanterns, while motion blur in gameplay is completely absent. Now there is a hint of an extra motion blur effect during one smash attack. Captain Falcon's in particular shows this whole road whipping by with the blur effect added on Switch. Note the comparison between 3DS and Wii U. Other than that, the post-process pipeline is played straight down the line. So, in review, Switch gets new textures, effects, lighting and fully dynamic shadows, but at a cost to shadow resolution and those missing fur shaders on Donkey Kong. Then there are the stylistic changes, areas which take a technical sideways step. In keeping with the times, characters from the Legend of Zelda series are swapped for their cel-shaded designs from Breath of the Wild. Not only that, but aspects of the game's entire aesthetic take this path too. Explosions, fire and trailing puffs of smoke use a similar cel shading inflection, plucked straight from the latest Zelda. The alpha effects used for these look gorgeous, but it's curious to see it mixed with that new, more realistic lighting. It's almost a halfway house between the cel shaded approach on the 3DS and a more technically progressive path set by the Wii U. Regardless, Smash Bros. Has always revelled in clashing disparate visual styles together, and this really is no exception. All of which brings us to the 3DS. As Nintendo's successor to the handheld space, Switch gives us one of the biggest visual leaps between sequels we've seen in a long time. A native 400 by 240 resolution gets bumped up to 1280 by 720 on Switch's portable screen, a 9 times increase in pixels. We're no longer looking at cel-shaded characters, low-res textures or basic circular blobs for shadows. If you'll recall, the vision for the 3DS and Wii U releases was to offer a similar playing experience whether at home or on the go. This time that's a given. Sakurai and his team committed all their energy to one machine here, and the results are tremendous. The jump from 3DS to Wii U to Switch is marked by the change in texture resolution, lighting and character model quality. Looking back, it's still remarkable how much the 3DS got away with at the time. Given its relatively low power spec, running on a DMP Pika GPU at 268MHz, it must have been a real challenge to squeeze such a frenetic 60fps experience onto a handheld. Modes were changed or cut, notably the 8-man brawls, but the mechanics are convincingly close to the Wii U. There's an argument that this cel-shaded style should have been expanded upon more with the Switch, a road not taken. As it stands though, we have a clear visual progression over the last two releases. So what's the deal with playing Smash Bros. Ultimate away from the TV, as a portable experience? The good news here is that yes, Switch's visuals are broadly identical whether docked or played as a handheld. You're dropping the resolution from 1080p down to 720p to match the display, but all the textures, effects and even model quality stay exactly the same. No dynamic resolution scaling is used either, to my testing so far at least, so you do get a fixed level of image quality. There is one other downgrade while playing handheld. Running away from the dock, shadow quality also takes a hit. Using the game's replay mode to run the exact same battles side by side, Switch shows the shadow resolution on characters is downgraded, as you can see in Fox's intro. It's rougher, but on balance, it's hardly going to notice on the smaller screen. As a concession to make this work on the go, it's one I'm happy to take. For all its visual improvements over Wii U, seeing Switch run this at a locked 60fps is a welcome sight. Out of principle, we ran the game through our tools anyway, just to check the game's not skipping a beat. Sure enough, playing docked here, it's a straight 60fps line with VSync as you'd expect. Whether that's 1v1 games or more daring 4-player brawls, it's just about perfect. That's with the exception of single frame drops when a final smash attack kicks off. These one-off drops are rare though, and it doesn't actually affect the flow of play. Let's up the ante for a moment with 8-player battles. Sticking to docked play, there's little sign of switch buckling. This runs flawlessly, with every player using a different character, items at medium, and on taxing open stages. Again, there is the potential for one-off hiccups after initiating a special move, but that's the worst of it. Smash Ultimate comfortably hands in 60 FPS, and it marks one of few games to support this many players and control combinations. It's a great result. Okay, so what about Ice Climbers? This is, in theory, where we'll find the real stress test. An 8-man battle with everyone selecting Ice Climbers gives us 16 players on screen. On a GPU taxing stage like Fountain of Dreams, with that reflection underfoot, clearly Switch starts having troubles here. There's no telling how Wii U would have handled this combination, but with Switch docked under a TV, we're seeing frame rates run between 45 to 60 FPS. In fact, at the very worst point, performance can even throttle right down to the 30 FPS mark. It's worth stressing that this is the absolute worst case scenario. All players are on screen, and it appears excessive alpha effects in combination with all these Ice Climbers are the cause. These Ice Climbers give us an exceptional case, and it confirms Ice Climbers really is the Smash series' worst enemy when it comes to performance. It also puts into perspective the struggle HAL might have had on Wii U and 3DS, and why this duo never made the cut. With all that said about Switch's docked play, what about playing as a portable? In a side-by-side test, there's nothing in this. 60 FPS is again the mainstay for every moment of action on Switch. It's perfect even with 4-player battles on larger stages like the Gower Plains. Now, I couldn't resist testing 8-player battles again in our Ice Climber test, this time in portable mode. Capturing matching replays on docked and portable, there's a surprise here. The portable mode handles the exact same rendering load at a slightly higher frame rate by 2 to 3 FPS. So what's going on? Well, by running the same sequence back in each mode, clearly both struggle. Clearly the cutback in shadows while running Switch as a portable console, plus that lowering to 720p, gives it more GPU headroom for stress points. Even factoring in its lower GPU clocks while played in this state, away from the dock, it still gives us more wiggle room to cope with taxing situations, if only by a bit. So yes, portable mode runs marginally smoother, but it's not enough to salvage 60 FPS with all Ice Climbers on screen, but as a benchmark, it's interesting to see. A final note on general performance and input lag in particular. Getting the game to update at 60 FPS or 16.7 milliseconds per frame is hugely important to the competitive scene. However, based on the tests conducted by YouTube channel Gigaboots, there's still a lot of latency in Smash Ultimate to contend with here. Now all credit goes to Gigaboots on this one. Input lag testing is a time-consuming process, and his channel is well worth visiting if you want more information on the subject. Based on his test though, playing Smash Ultimate with a GameCube controller adapter gives the lowest input latency possible on Switch, at 98.3 milliseconds input lag on average. The surprise is, this is still higher than the Wii U version at 77.1 milliseconds, and also 3DS at a much lower 61.1 milliseconds. What does this mean then? Well, it's over 2 frames of lag more than the last handheld version. And based on this evidence, it's the least responsive Smash game to date. Will it affect your enjoyment of the game? Well, it depends on your expectation going in. It's a long way away from the N64 original or Melee, still the 2 most responsive titles in the series, and competitive play will involve adjusting to. It's very likely the layering of more visual effects in Ultimate has added to the rendering pipeline, which stacks extra milliseconds of lag on. For all the improvements in that area, there does appear to have been a trade-off. As an Ultimate package, there is one bigger mission then, a mode which strips the experience back for the lowest latency controls. Perhaps it's idealistic, but even including Melee as a secret unlock running just as it did on GameCube would have been enough to please the hardcore crowd. For the sheer level of control, the low input lag, and the purity of the combat mechanics, Melee will always have the heart of the competitive fighting scene for that reason. Regardless, what Smash Bros. Ultimate achieves is still remarkable in its own right. It's going to get a lot of mileage over the years as the most comprehensive and fully featured version, and on those terms, it's still a huge success. In Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, we have one of the best Smash titles ever made, and indeed games on Switch in general. The ability to run it docked, portable, with every type of controller imaginable, and up to 8 players, makes this a perfect match for Nintendo's vision of a truly versatile console. All of this runs at 60 FPS with extreme exceptions, and HAL Laboratories can treat this as a series peak. It's a culmination of years of effort in character and stage design, every one affectionately finding a place in its menus. As a technical showcase for Switch, there's nothing quite like it. For all its differences to previous versions, Ultimate is a high watermark for the developer that will be difficult to surpass. That's all from me today though. If you did enjoy this analysis, please feel free to give us a like or subscribe to support the work we do. Also, hitting the bell will let you get notifications as any new video lands. We also have the source file to this analysis on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. And to get in contact with me or the team, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.